We're always ready. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. I can't believe that on such a beautiful day you're here with us, but we're air conditioned, so I think you made the right move. For those of you who don't know me, I am Marilyn Carroll, the very proud president of the League of Women Voters of Ridgefield. And I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, and to thank the library for co-sponsoring this program, and of course our registrars for giving us all the information we need to know. Before I turn the meeting over to them, however, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to give you a quick overview of redistricting, which I'm sure you're going to be really excited about. Redistricting is a process by which new congressional and state legislative district boundaries are drawn. District lines are redrawn every 10 years following completion of the United States Census. The federal government stipulates that districts must have nearly equal populations and must not discriminate on the basis of race or ethnicity. These districts determine where you vote and who represents you at all levels of government. Now let's talk about Connecticut for a minute. In Connecticut, the General Assembly is responsible for redrawing legislative and congressional district lines. Following the process and timeline outlined in the Connecticut Constitution, a bipartisan group of legislators must assess the population changes and ensure that the boundaries of the State House and State Senate District and the U.S. House District are drawn to have substantially the same number of residents, that those districts are contiguous, and that State House District must not divide towns except when necessary to comply with other legal requirements. Now let's talk about Connecticut and its population. We have about 3.6 million people. Following the 2020 census, we kept our seats in districts in the United States House of Representatives, and the ideal population for a Connecticut State House district was determined to be 23,865 and 100,099 for a Connecticut State Senate district. You're going to find out why I mentioned that. Ridgefield's population grew by 1.6% to 25,033, and that, my friends, exceeds the ideal Connecticut House district number. So, how did it all turn out? After several twists and turns and intervention by the state Supreme Court to determine the new U.S. congressional district boundaries on November 18th and November 23rd, 2021, respectively, the Connecticut Reapportionment Commission voted 8-0 in favor of new maps for the state's 151 House districts and 36 Senate districts. The commission was made up of 4 Democratic and 4 Republican lawmakers and a 9th member selected by the commissioners. They took over the redistricting process after the previous reapportionment committee failed to meet its September 15th deadline. And for those of you who didn't notice, they actually didn't get the census information until September 16th, so I guess they did miss their deadline. Unlike the committee, the maps prepared by the Reapportionment Commission did not need to win approval from the General Assembly. So, the November 8, 2022 election will be the first election held using the new districts. There's a lot of information with more detail about the redistricting process, which can be found on the Connecticut General Assembly website under 2021 redistricting process, as well on Ballotpedia. The Connecticut Mirror has all kinds of articles about it, and the League of Women Voters of Connecticut website under People-Powered Fair Map Campaign has all kinds of information. And let me tell you, the Connecticut Constitution is silent on both transparency and public engagement when it comes to redistricting, which really concerns the League of Women Voters. For the last 3 years, with their People-Powered Fair Map campaign, the League has focused on the need for transparency, public involvement, and nonpartisanship in the redistricting process, and will continue to fight for those principles to be instituted for the next redistricting session in 2031. With the help of our registrars, the League has prepared a document that explains what the Ridgefield voting and legislative districts are and how you can go online and find out what your districts are. And since the Democratic and Republican Party primaries are scheduled for August 9th, we've also provided you with some voter information about that as well, so please feel free to take a copy of the handouts. And I think Wayne might have some information about that a little later. Now, I am sure you'd like to hear from our registrars of voters, Democratic Registrar Mrs. Cindy Bruno and Republican Registrar Mr. Wayne Vogel, who will about how legislative and voting districts have changed and how you can find out if it has impacted you. And they can also correct anything that I've said that is wrong. And I must tell you, I actually am the poster child for redistricting in Ridgefield. Last year, I was in State House District 138. I live in northern Ridgefield. This year, I will be in District 111. And last year, I was in State Senate District 26. And this year, I will be in District 24. So you can use me as an example. Thank you all again for coming. I'm going to turn this over to Cindy and Wayne right now.
Okay, so once again, thank you for being here. I really appreciate most of all of what you shared, Marilyn. All of what you shared, Marilyn. And I will say that anywhere there was a decision, this public was very engaged in this process and also done nonpartisan. Now, most of it is out of our hands. Most of it is handed to us. But I do want to start because this is probably one of the things we're proud of.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah.
When given any room, we did not change voters' polling places. When we had the opportunity to keep people in the same physical location, we purposely did that. Just want you to know that. I mean, that's how we approach this, and that's how we approach all the work we do in the office for the ease of people exercising their right to vote. Just a tiny little history, and Marilyn just touched on it. So, as you know, the redistricting comes about every 10 years, sometimes a little longer, depending what's happening in the world. So, about 10 years ago, as Marilyn described, so it was, the only change was the 111th from 600 Ridgebury Road north and the north side of George Washington, Canberry, 700 voters were affected, and they were moved into the 138th. Here is one of them. There are others here. That was pretty seamless, because it was seamless as far as our work in our office, because it was literally a straight line, unlike what we experienced this year. And it only affected the one seat. As Marilyn described, this redistricting affected both the Senate and the Assembly. So it was a little more complicated. It was a lot more complicated. But it is completed. Took a big effort from maps that were given to us from the process, maps we had on our own, Google Maps.
And sometimes actually house visits.
And drive-bys.
And we would go drive by houses to make sure that where their location was, or in this case, where their driveway was, on what side of the street and what have you. That's how we determined, or we're using our tools that we had, but we were able to better fit where they should be going.
We were also given an additional tool through Secretary of State. They partner with UConn on a lot of voting issues to keep things, I guess how would you say it? They use UConn as a tool. They step in if we have a tabulator issue, they'll do testing. So again, they came up with a tool and they sent it to us. So we had to go through
It was kind of
about 50 addresses.
At first, when I first opened it up, there was probably about 1,000 errors on there, and it scared me to death because I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to be doing this all for a year. But then they fixed it and it went down to 50.
Yeah, it was about 50. Many of which were not errors at all. They had streets in the wrong part of town. I don't know how a registrar honestly would do this job. Thankfully, we're from two different geographical areas of town, and that came in really handy. We were familiar with different sections of town, plus, like I said, the drive-bys and the maps and the Google Air and driveways and where's that mailbox. And so it is complete. We have a map. We'll keep a map in our office. We can send maps out electronically if someone really wants a map of their own district or of the whole town. Every street is on our map, but you definitely need some glasses to read those roads. The other tool we have, which will be probably the most helpful thing to anyone, and again, you can, anyone who wants to help inform the public, I should say, as an individual, there's an easy tool. We have a street list. There are streets that are split.
The main streets, if West Mountain is split in a couple of different locations, so there'll be literally one or two houses that are in Senate District 24, and the other side of the street, or vice versa, they'll be in 26. So it was that kind of adjusting back and forth. But if you look at the street guide, it'll say West Mountain Road, 0 through 100, odd is in District 24, or what have you. And then, so that's how you'll see the street guide and the lists, or the divided streets and how they're done.
And if anybody wants that complete list of all 500 streets, we can send that out simply electronically to you. If that's not your bag, you can come pick up a copy in the office if you like. Because while the maps give us a good overview, it's very difficult to see exact houses on the borders. So the other best tool of all, and on the handout in the back, you have this great handout that Marilyn made. So you can, obviously can use this URL code, or you can just go to the Secretary of State's website and do a voter lookup of yourself. You put in your town, your last name, first
Name,
name,
address, date of birth.
date of birth.
It's called the
Definitely date of
voter
birth.
registration lookup.
Yeah. And that will
Tells you right here.
and that will tell you the districts that you live within and the place where you vote.
No, then they have to go to the Ridgefield voting district which is on your website, and that will tell you where to go. Yeah, it's a two-step process. They have to go first to the voter registration lookup. They type in the name, address, and date of birth, and that tells you what voting district you're in. Then your voting district will determine what state senate district and state representative.
Yeah.
If you want to know who you're voting for, you then have to go to the Ridgefield voting district, and that will tell you what House district you're in and what state senate district you're in. Unfortunately, there's not one spot that tells you both.
There's not. So the first voter lookup is going to tell you where you physically go vote, and then, as Marilyn described, then it will tell you exactly who your representatives are. So let's talk a second about the physical location. So District 2, when we had this split 10 years ago, we literally just did 2 and 4 in the same room, separate machines, separate ballots every other year for the state elections. That's what will happen now at East Ridge Middle School. The old District 1 will still be District 1, East Ridge Middle School. It'll also house, if you will, every other year, District 4, which is the newest, the double change district. No, I'm sorry, only one. Only one.
House District 42.
House
Here.
Assembly.
Hold on, paper.
So the House Assembly 42 is that southwest corner. They'll vote at District 1, East Ridge Middle School, but they'll do District 4 because they'll have a separate ballot. And then, of course, the northern portion that was District 4 is all encompassed in District 2 now. And we still have Yanni Gym as a polling place. So our physical polling places have not changed. Some people's representation has changed. Do you want to talk about the Senate? So the House is 42 and 111.
Okay.
Senate.
That's the new Senate District, which is the northern half of our town is Senate District 24, not to be confused with Senate 26, which is the South Districts, and there's a lot of 2s and 4s, which is really confusing us too. So, but yeah, that location, again, for the most part, hasn't changed. The location is still the same. And again, we tried to keep as many people in the same voting location. Yes, your representation might have changed, or it did, but you're going to still go to the same location.
And just so people, if you want to know what towns are in what districts, for the Connecticut State House District, District 111 is all of Ridgefield except for a tiny section of the southwest corner, which is a border on Wilton, is a very southwest section of Ridgefield on the border of Wilton. All of Wilton, and a very small section of New Canaan. The state senate district for Ridgefield, District 24, is northern Ridgefield, all of Danbury, and a small section of New Fairfield. District 26 is southern Ridgefield, all of Wilton, Reading, Weston, Westport, and a sliver of New Canaan, and a sliver of Darien, and a sliver of Stamford. And that's how it's ended up.
Anything else before we do questions?
Any questions?
The 42nd is about 1,200 voters. And it was, without getting into a lot of technical minutia, it was a little difficult to keep track of. We think there's about 200 people that are affected as far as physically changing their polling place. Is that fair? Not even that many. So we, but most of that, like I said, most of this was beyond our ability to change. I'll just give you an example. When we say we're keeping people the same, we've always had some split streets. If they were split and they weren't affected by redistricting, we didn't change it. Because it is our belief that most people know physically where they vote. They might not know whether it's number 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we wanted to keep their physical location the same when we could. So does anybody have any questions?
Tom?
Just idle curiosity on my part. But how many people were totally unaffected by all of this?
Oh,
Unaffected meaning location where they go vote?
26 and
They're doing the
111.
same thing this year they did 2 years ago.
90,
do you mean their representation or physically where they're gonna vote?
All of the above.
Two different answers. Where they're gonna vote
98, 99%.
are gonna vote at the same place,
And have the same representatives?
not necessarily.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, that's it.
That's two different answers, because now half the town has different representation. I mean, physically half the town.
I was gonna say, did
You
you
can do quick math, but
So there's 17,500 voters. District 2, Scotts Ridge Middle School is 6371. That's Senate and 111. Does that help?
Okay. But there are a lot of people who are going to do the exact same thing now as they did 2 years ago.
Physically?
physically, most people.
Yes.
But not as far as the representation is concerned.
Yeah, well, okay, we got it.
So everybody who voted at Scotts Ridge Middle School last year is still going to vote at Scotts Ridge Middle School,
Good.
with a couple of
I know
exceptions.
exactly where they're going, yeah.
But their representation has changed.
But we are no longer going to have 138 as our House district or Senate 26.
Okay,
We're going to have,
we got it.
yeah,
But
111 and 24.
But since I'm the cup is half full kind of a guy, we now have 2 state senators
Exactly right.
representing Ridgefield and 2 state representatives.
Yeah.
So the positive side, we have more people representing us.
John?
I'll throw a softball to you. Are there any seats that are district seats that have not changed at all
In the state?
in our district? I'm trying to give you a hint.
Well, this is a softball question.
Oh, yeah, totally. Many, because
I'm not talking about the federal, I'm talking about the state level.
state, oh, wait a minute.
I'm doing it
No, I don't think he needs it, he needs where he lives.
knowing that's the one that doesn't change at all to answer this
Oh,
question.
okay.
That's the one, both
So,
locations.
Mr. Collins is pointing out, that is not the same. The judge of probate was not affected by redistricting, nor were the registrar voters, nor were any of the state. The only affected elected officials or representation are the state senate and the state assembly.
Exactly.
Not federal, not local,
Not for us.
not federal for us. I mean,
Congressional district
I
is not changing.
assume we're talking about our voters, yeah. Yeah. But that is a district office, judge of probate, but it was not affected by redistricting.
So Cindy and Wayne, what you got from Hartford were new districts, and then your job was to take those new districts and assign the voters of Ridgefield a polling place based on these 2 Senate districts and these 2 House districts. And it sounds like you did an excellent job of keeping people in the same place, but you had no control over putting them in Senate District 24 versus 26. That was given to you, and then you said,
That's correct, with a few examples of where okay, so first of all, what we were given were maps and lists that didn't necessarily jive.
This is being recorded, sorry.
That's the truth. So that took a good part of the winter and early spring to reconcile that through the maps, the drive-bys, the calls, all of that. In the end, there were, I want to say maybe down to 10, 12
10, 12, yeah.
households, not voters even, because we're doing it by street, not by voter at this point, whose property was split between two districts. So we proposed to the Secretary of State's office that we should use the driveway, and they agreed with that. It was our job, we felt like it was our job to come up with a formula that could be sustained through the process, not a haphazard, not like, oh, that property is 3 acres and 2 acres are in the 26th. So we used the driveway because it is used in other legal ways. And they agreed with that, just said keep a list, which we have, a little spreadsheet of the 12 or so households that are affected by that and the reason why, along with the list of the streets that they had in the wrong physical location on the map.
And you would think that like the lines when they're making these mappings or the maps, there's the center of street line and then there's the line that everyone else uses. Because actually the district line or the line that separates the two is not necessarily in the middle of the street. It absolutely goes into some people's like curves around and goes into one house gets swallowed up on a road that has nothing to do with, say West Mountain, because again, I'm familiar with West Mountain, and it just didn't make sense. So even Danbury is not the straight down Danbury line, and they being the Secretary of State and all this other information points that we got said that they have to be in this district, and we fought for some and kept some, and we lost the battle on some others, but.
As opposed to, that's exactly what happened 10 years ago. It was the north-south, the middle of Canterbury and George Washington Highway, and at number 600 Ridgefield. It was a much easier line to work with. This was much more challenging. We also hired a map maker, a company that does other work for the town with GIS and layered mapping, and had multiple phone calls with that gentleman and his company to produce the maps. Here's a for instance. So Fox Hill condominiums, most of those streets weren't listed anywhere, but we know what they are. So we had to then, while we hired a map maker, we had to feed him a lot of information because the maps and the lists from the committee didn't include more than half. They only included like maybe 3 of the streets that are there. And yet those are legitimate addresses. They're not private roads, they're addresses. So, and it wouldn't matter. I don't know why I brought up private roads, that wouldn't matter. So there was a lot of so most of it goes very smoothly, most people aren't changed at all, and then the small percentage that are changed or affected, it was complicated, but it's done.
And we are required by state statute to produce these maps and give to the Secretary of State. Although it's a fantastic tool, and I've always wanted this to help our voters because it's easy to look at, it's easy to view, and you can, understand what's going on. We had to do it for the Secretary of State. So, that was a huge portion of it that we, because it was a pretty big expense on our behalf going into COVID here and asking for a lot of money was difficult. But
how do they know how much of southwest Ridgefield to lop off to put into the 47?
Well, that goes back to that committee work. Certainly, we have
So
no,
where do they get the population, or where do they get the numbers
from the census.
from the population of the people who live?
From the census.
From the
From the
census.
census. And those were the numbers that I gave about the ideal House district and the ideal state Senate district. And then they're a lot stricter with the US House congressional. They're really pretty serious. They give a little leeway with the state House and state Senate, but not so much with the congressional. And that, neither the committee nor the commission could come up with a final answer about how to redistrict the 5 congressional districts. So it went to the Supreme Court, Connecticut Supreme Court, who hired an expert from California who came over to determine how to make sure the 5 districts were as even as possible and actually changed very little. And we remained the same, so we weren't impacted by it at all.
But it did hold up our process, because we had to wait. So there was the first delay Marilyn talked about from September to November, and then we were waiting until after February was the deadline for the congressional, I think the 15th,
Right, 50.
of which I'm not even sure they met it. Or maybe by the time the information was got
I
to
think
us.
they actually did meet it,
Okay.
but then, of course,
Then
we had to
it's-
go through all the machinations, yes, right.
Yeah, so,
Yes,
Not a question, just a statement for all those in the room that don't know our 2 registrars, just a massive thank you for that amount of work.
John,
And
that
for
was
those
my
that don't
last
know.
comment. I will.
But also, I will tell you, if you ever walk into our registrar of voters office, it is the most open, friendly, nonpartisan place on the planet. And we are very lucky to have that here in Ridgefield.
That's
So
exactly
kudos
what I
to
was
you
gonna
guys.
say.
All right, so I didn't say that.
As it-
You want
as
to
it
say,
should
let
be.
Marilyn say it.
That's gonna be my last comment, that the town, the state, and the country should model themselves after the kind
We are
of
very, very
relationship
fortunate. Other
that,
places in the country.
that they have. I mean, it's really extraordinary because they don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Green, whatever, or unaffiliated. They are delighted to have you as a voter. They explain everything that you need to know. They are encouraging, they are welcoming, and as John said, we are very, very fortunate to have you both. And I really wish more people would, politicians and people in general, would model themselves after you two, because it's a pleasure working with you, and the league is very fortunate to have the kind of relationship that we do have. The one thing I think, Wayne, you wanted to point out, you will notice if you look at the Republican and Democratic primary information,
There.
it has, it explains about how you can register. It also reminds you that it is too late to register, change your affiliation to vote in the primaries, because that should have been done
Between parties.
Between parties. But if you are unaffiliated or a new voter, you absolutely can register for one of the parties and participate in the primary. The deadline is August 4th. For an in-person, it's noon on August 8th. We, as a nonpartisan organization, follow what the absentee ballot looks like, and it's usually, it has to be ready 19 days, I think it's 19 days or 21 days, I can't remember which, prior to the election. So you will just notice, and Wayne, I'm gonna let you talk about this.
Prior to the primary.
To the primary, yeah. And so you will, Wayne pointed out that there is an individual listed for a Secretary of State Republican primary who has withdrawn. But at the time that we looked at the ballot, his name was still on there. As a matter of fact, it is still on there, and it will have to be taken off
Yes.
by the town,
So,
if they so choose.
Again, Brock Weber, he dropped out of the Secretary of State race after after our ballots and the cards were printed and programmed. Direction from our Secretary of State was we can cross out his name with a black marker, just his name, no other marks on there, and it will not affect the ballot. So that is what I decided to do, or to save money for the town. So if you look at the Republican ballot, which I have a sample of here, you'll just see 2 black marks on Mr. Weber's name. And so that's it. It was, I don't know why he decided, to drop out. It's not our position. I just wanted to have our stuff ready to go and the ballots ready to go. So it is what it is. And so that's why you'll see the black marks on the Republican ballot for Secretary of State.
So that's our explanations why we had it and why it's not gonna be on there.
It shocked all of it. I mean, I was part of the process. We in the convention, he was all excited, came out great, and the next day he said he was excited to primary. And then the last day, he said, I'm not gonna do it, so.
Is that a learning point? Because I think that he withdrew within the proper time periods, but functionally it was after stuff was printed. Is that something that as Secretary of State legislation need to take up?
Yeah.
Think about? Or is this just like one of those weird
They
things?
have to follow the absentee ballot rules and have ballot availability by Constitution by a certain number of days. So, I don't know.
Well, I will say this, John, that when we switched in '07 to this type of voting, the Scantron, all of, and I'm trying to wrap my brain, because last year there was a lot of changes, a lot of cleanup legislation. That took a while for it to catch up. The law changes that would match the tabulator, because if you picture that big old machine, you print a new strip and you put in the new strip. It was a much simpler situation if someone dropped out late. It still would have affected absentee, but some of that hasn't caught up. Some of it hasn't caught up, in our opinion.
Tom?
It would seem to me that you could never legislate what to do if somebody dies before the primary, so this is fine. I'm okay with you crossing it out.
I don't like it, I'll be honest. I mean, it doesn't look right, and we fight really hard for it. It just doesn't look right.
I mean, it'd be nice to have legislation that would prevent it, but
Exactly.
Is there consensus among your colleagues in other towns, Wayne? Are they also crossing out, or what's happening in Ridgefield is different than Wilton, different in Weston?
What I heard, there was only 1 or 2 towns that actually reprinted.
And
Okay.
some hadn't received their ballots, so they were able to get
Maybe put phone call and say.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So some people were fortunate in that sense. There is a third option on anybody would do it. You put a sticker over the name. We're never doing that to jeopardize the
Wouldn't
machine.
that stick in the machine?
I'm just saying it was an option that was given us.
There was another
But I don't know anybody who's doing that.
So,
We don't like, okay, so a lot of people won't know who's crossed off. So that's why Wayne's saying we don't like the look of it. It's fine. It'll
it's
work.
fine, it's legit.
It's legal.
It's our instruction from Secretary of State that, we're covered. It's just, we don't like the way it looks. I mean, it's not clean, it's not precise, it looks.
Will his name remain on ballots in some?
No.
So everybody's gonna have to do
Do
something.
something.
They're gonna do something, whether they're
Okay.
gonna stick
He
it, they're gonna
withdrew.
cross out his name. The only weird thing is, from what I heard, but I didn't see this, is that, so the first person is A, the person that dropped out was B, and the next person is C. So B now is just an empty box. So it looks kind of weird as well, but it's not a black mark on someone.
It's A or C throughout the state, whether it's a blank or a cross out.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's no B,
There's no B.
there's no choice, and that gets weird.
Which brings us to the obvious. There is still a primary race for that office.
Yeah.
Because there were 3 candidates, now there's 2.
And now that we know that the Secretary of State giving you those instructions, we are taking his name off.
Well, and that's,
Start crossing off the.
that's why I printed that out, it's
Yeah.
actually on our Facebook, and people started to share it. I know that the Republican Town Committee was gonna put it on their website and their Facebook page as well, just to, because it just looks weird. And in this day and age, we wanna make sure that everyone knows this is what happened. It's not anything fishy.
Any more questions about the voting districts, legislative districts, primaries? I think,
Has anyone tried this since we?
yeah, try it out. if you have a minute, you can take your phone, start with the voter registration lookup. And I recommend that everyone do that every single year to make sure, just to make sure that they're still on the list, which of course, and you folks never take
What are you talking about?
I will say, if you don't find yourself, that's where you would call our office.
That's right.
Occasionally, doesn't happen as much lately because most things come in electronically. But in the day of reading people's handwriting, we could have easily misread the number.
And your numbers are right on that. Call the registrar, you're elected. So hopefully these QR codes did work.
Did you go to Google?
Yeah, they go right to Google, and
Yeah,
it
right
says
to
voter
Google and-
registration.
Yep,
It's
yep,
it,
yep.
And just type in your information, and it tells you where you're supposed to vote, and then you have to go to the other QR code for the Ridgefield voting districts, which is also on the Registrars website, and it will tell you what voting, what state senate and state house districts you will be voting for. And that, friends, unless you have any more information, is our show. So
And the
again,
league will have those name lists at every voter registration event, the street lists that we do. So if someone's confused and you see that the league is doing a voter registration event, you can tell them, hey, pop by there. The volunteers will look up your street address and tell you where you go to vote and who you're going to vote for.
and so you have lots of options to find out the information. You can go to the league's website at rlwv.org and go to voter services, and we'll have that information. You can go see the registrar, you can go to the Secretary of State. Lots of opportunities to find out that information. Give us a call. We're happy to help.
Yes.
That's it, folks. Thank you again very much.